Welcome to Music Guru, where rock and metal never die and every classic note still matters. So, today we're going to talk about something that Vito Bratta had to say about Jimmy Page, and it's a purely musical observation. And while I said that take that he had was very strange, it doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that it really caught me by surprise. But after I started thinking about what Vito Bratta had to say, I found that I actually agreed with him. And what's strange is if I hadn't heard him say it, I wouldn't have even thought of it myself. But once I thought of it, I had to agree that I think he's right about this. So what am I talking about? Well, Vito Bratta isn't exactly known for being outspoken, and he's famously reclusive, but every once in a while he speaks up about guitar playing, and it's usually worth listening to him. In a recent resurfaced interview, he had something kind of strange to say about Jimmy Page, and here's what it is. While Vito calls Page one of the most important guitarists in his own development, and someone who he thinks is one of the greatest and most fundamentally earth-changing guitarists in the history of the instrument, he also threw out a bit of a curveball when he said, to any aspiring guitarists out there, don't use the violin bow. That's Jimmy's thing. He even went so far as to call Jimmy Page's work with the violin bow a gimmick. He said, I don't want to call it a gimmick, but... And to be fair, Page's violin bow work on tracks like Dazed and Confused is one of his most iconic signature sounds, and it was a huge part of Led Zeppelin's live show. It's a very large part of the movie. The song remains the same, and it takes up an entire album side of the soundtrack. And what Page does with the violin bow when it's a solo instrument is kind of weird and theatrical, a bit hypnotic, maybe a little sinister. Some people find it to be brilliant, and others just think it's noisy. Now, he also uses the violin bow in background tracks on Led Zeppelin's studio albums to good effect in the way that you might use a synthesizer. One example of this is the song In the Light. The very beginning of the song, that droning sound, is the violin bow being used on an acoustic guitar. So here's what I'd like to ask all of you. Do you think the violin bow was a gimmick, or is it a legitimate musical expression within the context of Led Zeppelin? And second of all, have any other guitarists that you can think of successfully pulled off using the bow in a way that's added something new, or did they just all look like they were trying too hard to be Jimmy Page? And do you think Vito is right to say that the technique should be basically left to Jimmy Page himself? Now, I will mention that the technique of using a violin bow on the guitar actually predates Jimmy Page. One of the earliest known examples came from Eddie Phillips of the British band The Creation. He used it in the mid-1960s. Page later adopted and popularized the technique during his time with Led Zeppelin, turning it into a theatrical centerpiece in live performances. And nowadays, there are still people who do it. Back in the heyday of classic rock, of course, every guitarist out there was using the violin bow. Thing is, I don't remember anyone ever using the violin bow in a way that stood out other than Jimmy Page. So that's why when Vito Bratta made this comment, I started thinking about it, and I was like, well, you know what? He may be right. It might be that Page owns the bowing technique. It's one of those moves that's so Pagey that whenever anyone else does it, they just seem like they're trying to copy him. Now, I mean, you could say the same thing about like Eddie Van Halen's tapping technique, but there are people who do the tapping technique with their own stamp on it that don't really sound anything like Eddie. I mean, one of the examples of that would be Vito Bratta himself. Yes, he kind of looks like Eddie, and yes, he definitely tried to sound like Eddie, but he did have his own unique signature style. So anyway, what I'd like to know is, what do you think about all of this? I am not particularly a fan of the violin bow work. I think it is best when it's done in the background in the studio albums with Led Zeppelin, and I'm gonna say I agree with Vito here. This is what I think, but what really matters is what you think. So if you have an idea about this or any other topic connected to classic or contemporary music, please drop it in the section below, and remember to like and subscribe. Thanks a lot.
Music Guru here, asking you to help us on our march to 10,000 subscribers.